Many people notice that certain thoughts remain active in the mind long after an event has passed. A conversation, a mistake, or a situation may return repeatedly in thought, even when there is no immediate reason to revisit it. The experience can feel as if the brain is holding on to something that should have already faded. Instead of moving on, the mind continues returning to the same idea, examining it again and again from slightly different angles. This pattern is often described as not being able to let something go. From a psychological perspective, this reflects how the brain processes unresolved information. When an experience occurs, the mind attempts to understand it fully. However, not all situations provide clear conclusions. Some events leave questions unanswered or meanings uncertain. When this happens, the brain may continue revisiting the experience in order to complete its understanding. Rather than treating the event as finished, the mind keeps it active. Each time the thought returns, the brain examines it again, attempting to organize and interpret the details more clearly. What feels like repetition is often the mind continuing a process that has not yet reached a clear endpoint. Memory plays a central role in why certain thoughts remain active over time. When an experience occurs, the brain does not store it as a fixed and complete record. Instead, it encodes fragments of information, including images, emotions, and interpretations. These fragments are later reconstructed when the memory is recalled. If the original experience contained uncertainty or unresolved meaning, the reconstruction process may highlight those gaps. As the mind revisits the memory, it may attempt to fill in missing details or reinterpret what happened. This process can lead to repeated recall, as the brain continues adjusting its understanding of the event. Each reconstruction is slightly different, shaped by new thoughts or additional context. Because the memory does not feel fully settled, the brain may treat it as unfinished. The mind returns to it not simply to remember, but to reanalyze. Through this repeated reconstruction, the experience remains active in thought as the brain continues trying to make sense of it. Another reason the brain holds on to certain thoughts is the role of emotional significance. When an experience carries emotional weight, the mind may give it additional attention during processing. Emotions signal to the brain that something important has occurred, increasing the likelihood that the event will be revisited. The mind may return to the situation in order to understand how the emotional response developed and what it might represent. This does not necessarily mean the emotion is strong in the present moment. Even subtle emotional tones can influence how often a thought returns. The brain may continue examining how the experience relates to personal meaning, identity, or expectation. As long as the emotional aspect of the event remains unclear, the mind may keep it active. Each replay becomes part of an ongoing effort to interpret what the experience meant and how it fits within a broader understanding of the self and the world. Prediction also contributes to why the brain struggles to release certain thoughts. The human mind constantly attempts to anticipate future situations based on past experience. When an event occurs, the brain may examine how it could influence what happens next. If the situation seems connected to future outcomes, the mind may continue analyzing it in order to prepare for similar circumstances. The brain may imagine how the situation could repeat, or how a similar interaction might unfold differently. These imagined futures become linked to the original memory, keeping it active in thought. The mind is not only looking backward at what happened, but also forward at what could happen next. As long as the brain perceives the experience as relevant to future events, it may continue revisiting it. The thought remains present because the mind is using it as a reference point for understanding and predicting future situations. Another factor that keeps thoughts active is the brain's tendency to search for meaning. When an event does not clearly fit into existing understanding, the mind may continue examining it in order to interpret its significance. The brain attempts to connect the experience with prior knowledge, beliefs, or expectations. If a clear connection cannot be established, the thought may remain unresolved. During this process, the mind may revisit the situation repeatedly, each time attempting to extract a clearer meaning. The brain may ask how the event relates to previous experiences, or whether it changes how something is understood. Each attempt introduces a new interpretation that is compared with earlier ones. As long as the meaning of the event remains uncertain, the mind may continue returning to it. The thought remains active because the brain is still working to place it within a coherent framework of understanding. What appears as repetition is often the mind continuing its effort to organize information that does not yet fully make sense. Attention also plays an important role in why certain thoughts persist. When the mind focuses strongly on a particular experience, it increases the likelihood that the thought will return. The brain tends to prioritize information that has received sustained attention, treating it as relevant for further processing. As a result, the thought may reappear even when there is no immediate reason to recall it. Each time the mind returns to the thought, attention reinforces its presence. The brain continues examining the details, searching for patterns or connections that may not have been noticed before. This repeated focus can make the thought feel more significant than it originally appeared. Over time, the interaction between attention and memory keeps the thought active. The mind revisits it not because it is necessary, but because it has been repeatedly selected for further examination. Through this process, the brain continues analyzing the experience, even when no new information is being introduced. Internal dialogue often becomes more active when the brain is unable to release a thought. The mind may begin forming silent sentences that describe the situation, question its meaning, or explore different interpretations. One thought may suggest a particular explanation, while another introduces an alternative perspective. This internal exchange resembles a conversation taking place within the mind. Each sentence contributes to the ongoing analysis of the experience. The brain compares different interpretations while attempting to determine which one appears most consistent. Because the mind can generate many possibilities quickly, the internal dialogue may continue expanding. As this process unfolds, the thought remains active not only as a memory but also as a subject of continuous discussion. The brain is organizing information through language, using internal dialogue to explore how the experience can be understood from multiple perspectives. The passage of time can also influence how persistent thoughts are experienced. As new information becomes available, the brain may revisit earlier experiences and reinterpret them in a different way. A detail that once seemed unimportant may take on new meaning when viewed in a different context. These changes encourage the mind to return to the original thought in order to update its understanding. Each time the thought is revisited, the brain compares the original interpretation with a new perspective. This process can create a sense that the thought is evolving rather than repeating. The mind is not simply replaying the same idea, but adjusting it based on new insights. Because the understanding of the experience continues to change, the brain may keep the thought active. The mind returns to it as part of an ongoing effort to integrate new information with previous interpretation. Another reason the brain holds onto certain thoughts is its tendency to compare possibilities. When an experience occurs, the mind may not settle on a single interpretation. Instead, it generates several possible explanations and begins evaluating them. Each interpretation offers a slightly different understanding of what happened. The brain compares these alternatives while attempting to determine which one appears most accurate. Because these possibilities may conflict with one another, the mind may revisit the experience repeatedly. Each return allows the brain to examine the interpretations again, testing how well they align with the available details. The process continues as long as multiple explanations remain viable. Through this comparison, the thought remains active in the mind. The brain is not repeating the experience without purpose. It is examining different ways of understanding it, attempting to identify the interpretation that best fits the situation. The brain's focus on sequence also contributes to persistent thoughts. Experiences unfold as a series of connected moments, where each part influences what follows. After an event has ended, the mind may reconstruct this sequence step by step. It examines how one moment led to another and how the overall situation developed. By studying this sequence, the brain attempts to understand the structure of the experience. It may consider whether a different moment could have changed the outcome, or how the progression of events influenced the result. These reflections introduce additional possibilities into the analysis. As long as the sequence remains open to interpretation, the mind may continue revisiting it. Each replay allows the brain to examine how the events connect and whether they can be understood in a clearer or more consistent way. Imagination also plays a role in why thoughts are difficult to release. When recalling an experience, the brain may generate alternative versions of what could have happened. The mind imagines how the situation might have unfolded differently under slightly changed conditions. These imagined variations become connected to the original memory. The brain compares these alternative scenarios with the actual experience, examining how different actions or responses might have influenced the outcome. Each imagined version introduces a new perspective on the event. As a result, the thought expands beyond what originally occurred. This expansion keeps the experience active in the mind. The brain continues exploring how the situation might have developed in different ways, using imagination to examine possibilities that were never directly experienced. Social context can also influence why certain thoughts persist. Many experiences involve interactions with other people, and these interactions often carry multiple layers of meaning. After an event, the brain may revisit how others were involved, examining their responses, expressions, or possible interpretations. The mind may attempt to understand how the experience was perceived from another person's perspective. Because this perspective cannot be directly observed, the brain may generate several possibilities. Each imagined viewpoint becomes part of the analysis. As long as these interpretations remain uncertain, the thought may continue returning. The brain is attempting to understand how the experience fits within a social context, examining how it may have been interpreted by others and how those interpretations might influence future interactions. Another factor that keeps thoughts active is the brain's attempt to resolve incomplete patterns. Human thinking often seeks closure, where events feel finished and clearly understood. When an experience does not reach this sense of completion, the mind may continue returning to it. The brain attempts to identify how the situation fits into a complete structure, examining whether all parts of the experience connect in a meaningful way. If certain elements appear inconsistent or unclear, the thought may remain unresolved. The mind revisits the experience in order to determine how these elements relate to one another. Each replay allows the brain to examine the structure of the event again, searching for a pattern that feels complete. As long as the pattern remains open, the thought may continue returning. The brain is attempting to organize the experience into a form that can be understood as finished rather than fragmented or incomplete. Relevance to the present moment can also influence whether a thought persists. When the brain identifies a connection between a past experience and current circumstances, it may keep the thought active. The mind examines how the earlier event relates to what is happening now, searching for similarities or patterns that might provide insight. This connection encourages the brain to revisit the experience repeatedly. Each return allows the mind to compare past and present in greater detail. The brain studies how the earlier situation might inform current understanding or influence future expectations. As long as the experience is seen as relevant, the thought may remain active. The mind continues examining it as part of a broader effort to interpret how past events relate to ongoing situations. Internal processing gradually becomes more refined as the brain continues examining a thought. Early replays may focus on general aspects of the experience, while later reflections may concentrate on smaller details. The mind begins identifying specific elements that require closer attention, such as a particular moment or interpretation. Each stage of this process builds on the previous one. The brain compares earlier conclusions with new observations, adjusting its understanding as more details are considered. This gradual refinement can make the thought feel as if it is evolving over time. The persistence of the thought reflects the brain's ongoing effort to organize information into a clearer structure. Rather than remaining static, the interpretation of the experience continues to develop with each replay. When viewed more broadly, the brain's difficulty in letting go of certain thoughts becomes easier to understand. Human thinking is not only focused on remembering past events, but also on interpreting them and connecting them to future possibilities. When an experience contains uncertainty, emotional significance, or multiple interpretations, the mind may continue working on it beyond the moment in which it occurred. Each return to the thought represents another step in this process. The brain examines the experience from different angles, compares possible interpretations, and attempts to organize the information into a coherent understanding. What appears as repetition is often a continuation of this effort. The mind does not hold on to the thought without reason. It remains active because the brain is still processing it. The experience continues appearing in thought until it can be understood in a way that feels complete within the broader structure of memory, meaning, and future expectation. The persistence of certain thoughts reflects how the brain continues working on experiences that have not yet been fully organized into a stable understanding. Human thinking is not limited to recording events as they happen. Instead, the mind actively interprets, compares, and connects each experience to a broader structure of memory and expectation. When an event contains uncertainty, multiple interpretations, or incomplete meaning, the brain does not treat it as finished. It continues returning to the thought as part of an ongoing process of analysis. Each time the thought appears, the mind examines it from a slightly different angle. One moment of reflection may focus on what happened, while another may consider why it happened or how it relates to other experiences. These repeated examinations are not identical. The brain adjusts its interpretation each time, introducing new details or reconsidering earlier conclusions. Through this process, the thought gradually changes as it is integrated into a wider system of understanding. The brain also attempts to connect the experience to future possibilities. A past event may be examined not only for what it was, but for what it suggests about what might happen next. The mind may consider how a similar situation could unfold differently in the future, or how the outcome might change under different conditions. These imagined connections extend the life of the thought, keeping it active as the brain continues linking past experience to future expectation. At the same time, the mind works to organize the experience into a coherent structure. Events that are clearly understood tend to settle quickly, becoming stable parts of memory. In contrast, experiences that contain ambiguity or conflicting interpretations remain open. The brain continues revisiting them because they do not yet fit into a clear pattern. Each replay becomes part of an effort to resolve these inconsistencies and establish a more complete interpretation. This process also involves comparing the experience with existing knowledge. The brain evaluates how the event aligns with what is already known or expected. If the experience challenges these expectations, the mind may spend more time examining it. The thought remains active, while the brain attempts to reconcile the difference between what was expected and what actually occurred. Over time, the persistence of the thought reflects the gradual integration of the experience into memory and understanding. What appears as repetition is the continuation of this process. The brain is organizing information, testing interpretations, and building connections that allow the experience to become part of a stable mental framework. Once this process reaches a point where the experience can be understood consistently, the thought becomes less active, no longer requiring the same level of attention within the mind.